everyone, my name is Gabby and today I'm going to be bringing you my review of the first national touring company of Dear Evan Hansen. I got to see this wonderful cast perform on Friday, March 1st, 2019 at the newly minted Nederlander Theater in Chicago. I had the absolute best time and I'm so excited to dive in and discuss all of my thoughts, opinions, and feelings with all of you because I have plenty of them. So if you're new to this channel, you may not know that I am a huge fan of Dear Evan Hansen. I love this story and I'm so grateful that it's finally getting to tour so that more people have an opportunity to see the show. There's also a novelization of Dear Evan Hansen, which has allowed people to have access to the story. It deals with so many important themes and messages that mean so much to me and to so many other people that have allowed people to feel seen and heard and validated, and that's so important to me and I know to so many other people. So to get to see the show once with the original Broadway cast and now twice with the full original touring company is something that I'm so immensely grateful for because I know people don't get those opportunities. And I'm grateful that the show has become more accessible to more people in the years since it debuted on Broadway. So because I have plenty of Dear Evan Hansen videos, I'm gonna link them all down below for you if you want to check them out. I did a Dear Evan Hansen book tag where I came up with bookish questions and matched them along to the cast recording. I did a full-length review of the original Broadway cast of Dear Evan Hansen where I go into every single actor and their performance and just gush about the show. I did a review of the novelization of Dear Evan Hansen. I've talked about this show so much that I want to just dive right in and discuss all the spoilers and little nitty-gritty things about this show that I may have not noticed the first time around. So if you're unfamiliar with Dear Evan Hansen, I would check out some of my previous videos on it if you want to find out more, just because I don't want you to get spoiled and a lot of the things that I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to be talking about out of context, so you may not know what it is that I'm specifically referring to if you're not familiar with the show. So this review is probably better for people who've seen the show, who know it relatively well, and are familiar with what it is that happens on stage. Just because I've already done a full-length review, I don't want to spend too much time discussing things that I've already discussed. So if you want to check out that full-length review that I did with the full original Broadway cast of Dear Evan Hansen, that'll be linked down below, as well as all of my other Dear Evan Hansen related videos for you to watch. So without further ado, I want to dive in. So if you are not going to be staying, definitely make sure you check out some of my other videos, but for those of you who have seen Dear Evan Hansen and are going to dive into the rest of this video with me, let's get started. So one of the things I want to talk about first is just this idea of different isn't always a bad thing. So this is the first time that a touring company is stepping into these roles. So I think as an audience, we have a preconceived notion of how it is that the characters should be portrayed, how they look like, the way that they behave, the way that their voices sound, etc., etc., etc. When we go in and we see a new company, we're getting a completely new interpretation with a fresh new set of eyes. So the way that the characters are played on stage can be completely different than what it is that we know, and sometimes people aren't necessarily happy with that. So this sort of speaks to the very small minority of people who have gotten the opportunity to see the full original Broadway cast and an opportunity to see the touring company. So it's not necessarily maybe the most important issue to be discussed, but I still think it's something that is worth having a conversation about, or at least mentioning, because it was something that I was keeping in my mind as I was going in and watching the show, which is that all of these actors are completely different people and have completely different lives that could lead them to interpret these characters in a different way than the original Broadway cast. I think we as audience members are so fixated on what it is that we know that it's uncomfortable for us to step away from that and take in new performances and new interpretations that may be a little bit jarring for us because they're different from what it is that we're used to. And so I think if you're going into the show having seen it before, keep an open mind and be willing to see different performers put on different roles. I know that most people are not the type of people that are going to judge someone because their performance isn't the same as an original Broadway cast member, but I have seen reviews and things of people who have gotten to see an original Broadway cast and then saw a touring company and were upset with the touring company because they weren't the original Broadway cast, and that idea to me is something that upsets me, so I wanted to mention it in this review. So just keep an open mind when you get to see these performers because they were all absolutely wonderful, but their interpretations were different than the original Broadway cast, but they were, to me, different in a good way, and I don't want people to look at the interpretations and see them as different in a bad way. Keep an open mind when you go and see the show and enjoy it because I know that I did, and I loved this cast, I loved their interpretations, and I'm really excited to get to discuss all of their amazing performances, so let's finally dive in and discuss that now that I've gotten that little sidebar out of the way. So I do want to dive into more of the technical aspects of the show because I was looking back at my review for the full original Broadway cast and a lot of it is just me talking about the actors and things that they've done and their performances, and I didn't mention any specific details at all, and it was so unhelpful. I'm like, why would I upload this entire review that's incredibly long with almost nothing helpful in it as to what actually goes on in the show? So I want to spend most of that review talking about this, but there is a few actors that that I specifically want to call out for their standout performance that to me I really loved and thought was noteworthy and worth discussing in this review. So of course we have to talk about Ben Levi Ross because he is our Evan Hansen. I think it would be almost impossible to upload this review and film it if I don't talk about his performance. So one of the things that I want to say right off the bat that I loved about Ben Levi Ross and the way that he plays Evan is that he just has phenomenal, impeccable comedic timing. I feel like Evan as a character is not supposed to be one that's very comedic. At least that's the way that I interpreted it the first time around. But seeing Ben Levi Ross as Evan, he just found every single moment that he possibly could and made it funny or comedic in some way so that you have just this catharsis where there's moments where you're laughing and crying and you're just constantly feeling something, and he just killed it. I think a lot of the comedy obviously comes within the first act, within the first few moments that you meet Evan. He has conversations with Alana and Jared and conversations with his mom. Just all of those scenes in the very beginning were hilarious, and a lot of those funny moments came from Evan, not so much from the other characters, because Jared is a character that I feel like naturally we default to, or at least our preconceived notion in our mind as audience members is that he's the comedic relief character. He has a lot of the funny lines because he's a little bit of a jerk. He says things that most people normally wouldn't say or wouldn't be comfortable with saying, and because he's a little bit of a loudmouth, you laugh at the things he says because they're kind of awkward and uncomfortable and like they're funny, but they're also inappropriate too. That's the word I was looking for. He's just one of those characters that is very easy to be able to be a comedic relief character, obviously, despite the fact that he's also incredibly complex, but he is a comedic relief character in a way. You get a lot of laughs out of his character and his dialogue, but you wouldn't think that so much with Evan. But again, Ben Levi Ross just found so many great comedic moments to just deliver time and time again, and I loved it, and I thought he was hysterical, and he was just so great at finding those comedic moments and delivering and really just hitting the mark on every single one of them and finding moments that aren't even supposed to be comedic and making them comedic. It was beautiful. One of the things that I loved about his Evan is that it felt so genuine and authentic to me. When I was watching Ben on that stage, he felt like Evan, like a high school Evan who was going through what it was that he was going through, and I just saw it so much in him. Of course I saw it with Ben Platt. Like, this show would not have been as sensational and stand out as it was if it wasn't for Ben Platt. Ben Platt was a wonderful performer, but I feel like Ben Platt, because now I have to distinguish between the two of them because they have the same name, so that's fun. Ben Platt, his performance of Evan was very, very dramatic, and I think that's what drew people because it really hit you. Whereas with Ben Levi Ross, it felt more like a normal teenager who's going through what he's going through, and so everything felt very natural in a way. And maybe it didn't feel as dramatic to me because I knew the show, and so things that are supposed to hit people maybe didn't hit me the way that they did the first time because it's just something that hits you the first time that you're seeing it and maybe doesn't hit you the second time. So I don't know if that was something that was just potentially a cause of me having seen the show and knowing it relatively well because I've immersed myself so much within the story and the characters. His Evan felt more subdued. He felt like a normal high schooler who was going through social anxiety. Like, it felt more realistic than dramatic. I don't know if I'm even explaining this right at all because it's such a hard thing to explain unless you see both of them play Evan, but I loved both interpretations and I think both interpretations worked really well. But I personally liked getting to see Ben Levi Ross's interpretation, I think at least in the mindset that I was in, because I liked getting to see that authentic high schooler because it felt like I could connect to it and relate to it so much more. And I think also the casting director's decision to age down the characters and make them look like actual high schoolers is something that I love because I think it just adds to the authenticity of the show. And so for me, not just with Ben Levi Ross, but all the performers in general, I can say that their performances felt very authentic and very real, and they felt the part, which I love. Also, I want to briefly mention before I move on that there was some notes that Ben Levi Ross just went for and hit and sounded phenomenal. His voice, you can't compare it to Ben Platt's. That's just impossible, and that's just an unfair comparison because Ben Platt has a stellar voice, and I don't think there's anybody whose voice you can compare it to. Like I said, that would be unfair. But there were so many moments where I was really excited to see if Ben Levi Ross would be able to hit the notes or how he'd perform it or just how that certain moment would go, and he just hit so many notes and just went for it in so many times, and I just like felt like I fell in love more and more with his interpretation of Evan as the show went on, and watching him hit those notes, watching him perform Words Fail, it just was so beautiful, and I was so touched, and I was so grateful I got to see him because he was so talented. And one of the things that I think made me trust his performance or just feel so moved by it is the fact that I feel like he knows the story inside and out, because he's played Evan, obviously, but he's also played Jared and Connor because he was an understudy for Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway before he was given the part as the lead in the touring company. So he knows the show inside and out because he's played all of the three teenage male male leads. So because he knows the show so well, I feel like he's just a perfect person to play Evan and tell this story. He's a phenomenal Evan, and for all of you that get a chance to see him, I really hope you enjoy his performance as much as I did. Moving on, the next person that I want to discuss is Merrick Smith, who plays Connor, because oh my gosh, I love his interpretation of Connor so much. It just means the world to me. I feel like Connor is a character that in the past year and a half since I've seen Dear Evan Hansen on Broadway has really grown on me, and I think a lot of that has to do with the release of Dear Evan Hansen the novel. When I read the novel last summer, I had absolutely no idea how it was going to affect the way that I saw this show come March. I can say that it really didn't affect my viewing experience that much, other than the fact that I feel like I knew Connor as a character so much more now than I ever did before. That's a beautiful thing about Dear Evan Hansen novel. I think one of the things that it really does is it gives you the opportunity to get to know Connor as a character and understand what it is that's going on in his head, because there's no possible way to put that backstory into the musical. It just wouldn't make sense, because Connor is alive on stage for a very short period of time, and the only way that you could find out his backstory is through him, and there's no way to do that on stage with the way that the story is constructed. So the novel is a beautiful outlet to be able to tell Connor's story and to be able to find out what it is that's going on with him, and I love all those things that I find out, and I think you feel so much more sympathy for him. I just loved Connor so much, and Merrick's interpretation and the fact that I've grown to love Connor because of Dear Evan Hansen the novel, like those two things together just wrecked me. I was so sad and emotional watching Merrick play Connor. He just did a phenomenal job. One of the things that I love about his interpretation is that Merrick plays Connor to be much more sad and emotional and given up. In a way, it's almost the hardest thing to describe, but you can just tell how sad Connor is and how depressed he feels and lonely he feels and how he just wants someone to listen to him and nobody will listen, and it just was so heartbreaking to watch because he was just played Connor so sad, and like then knowing everything it is that I know about him from Dear Evan Hansen the novel, like it just made it hurt so much worse. I can't even describe it to you, but it was agony to watch him play Connor in the moments that he was on stage and he was alive, because I just felt so bad for him knowing what it is that I know about Connor, and it just, it was the worst, but it was also the best because interpretation was great, because I feel like Mike Feist plays his Connor a lot angrier, and I love, again, both interpretations. They're great, but I liked getting to see that sadder side to Connor, that side of Connor that is lonely and is isolated and wants connection but hasn't been able to get it, and so he sees everyone is against him because it's so much easier that way. His character is so heartbreaking, and the way that Merrick plays him just is devastating. So I want to talk about some of Merrick's acting choices that he made that helped to enhance his performance as Connor, and interpretations that I really, really like. So for one, there's this really great moment in the beginning of the show during Anybody Have a Map where Cynthia like asks Connor if he's high, and he just like picks his head up and looks at her, and it's just such a great comedic moment, and I love that moment so much, and I forgot about it from when I saw the show last, which like I said was a year and a half ago, so there's a lot of things that I've forgotten, and that moment just made me so happy, and I think that was a moment where I was like boom, and like from that moment on I was just sold on Connor, and I just fell in love with Merrick's interpretation of him because of that just like one moment, which is so ridiculous, but it's not as if he would have lost me because everything onward was just sensational as well. And then like I mentioned, for the period of time that we do see Connor on stage, Merrick plays him very sad, and you see that he's just very lonely, and he does try to pick a fight with everyone that he comes in contact with. There's that school shooter chic line that Jared delivers, and you just see how upset Connor is by it, and that was so devastating because what Jared says is really mean and hurtful, so obviously Connor's gonna be upset by it, but you can also tell that he's hurt because he realizes like there's nothing that he can do to change the way that people see him, and he's just so broken, and it hurt. And when he committed suicide, I actually felt horrible, and I wanted to hug him and let him know that he was loved. Like it just was excruciating, and I can't stop saying it because I'm just feeling it more and more now that I'm thinking about it. But when we do get to see Connor come back in Sincerely Me, I love the way that Merrick performs this role, because you need a really, really talented actor to be able to distinguish between this Connor who is a real person and this Connor who's a figment of Evan's imagination. And so you can see that his movements during Sincerely Me and the Sincerely Me reprise are very robotic. He's just being programmed and being told what to do. There was also lots of handshakes and like fun things going on, which I loved, but it also showed like this forced connection between Evan and Connor, trying to create this relationship that isn't there, that isn't real, where Connor is sort of becoming more like Evan and is given Evan's traits when there's that line that mentions like Connor loved trees that I think comes like very early on in the second act. I feel like you really see it in a lot of Merrick's movements during Sincerely Me and the Sincerely Me reprise, which is all the choreography, but obviously you need an actor to be able to deliver the choreography and to be able to deliver it in a way that allows the audience to form a connection, and he did that perfectly. So I loved Sincerely Me and the Sincerely Me reprise. Both of those numbers are definitely my favorites in the show, so I was a little bit biased anyway, but those numbers were great and I was so excited to get to see them performed again. In the moments that we get to see Evan and Connor together, one of the things that I noticed that surprised me that I feel like is blocking decisions that are things that just naturally the actor has to do and is told by the director to do, but I didn't notice them when I saw the show the first time, so I'm interested to know whether it was a choice or was a directorial decision, because it feels like it could be either or. I think the first time that you see Evan and Connor together alone, Connor appears behind Evan's bed and he sort of looks like the devil on his shoulder that's sort of trying to convince him or persuade him to keep going with the Connor project and is trying to like tell him these things to keep this story going despite the fact that it is all a lie, so that Connor will be remembered and so that his parents will be happy. And the staging of that, like the way that it's very symbolic, really caught me, and I feel like because I knew this show, I was able to look for those tiny little things and I noticed that and I thought it was brilliant. And then when you do see Connor on stage and you see him interacting with Evan, he mimics a lot of Evan's movements. It's very jittery and quirky in a way that matches Evan's quirks. So I think there has to be some sort of discussion between Evan and Connor as to like what are Evan's quirks going to be and how then is Connor going to embody that when he does come back, because Connor's essentially supposed to be a figment of Evan's imagination, so it makes sense that his movements would almost embody Evan as well. And I started to notice that and I was like, is this intentional or what is going on? But I thought it was brilliant and I just loved it. I felt like I saw those things consistently throughout Merrick's performance, and like I said, I love Connor now so much more than I ever did before, and his performance was sensational and I can't stop saying it enough. So one last thing about Merrick Smith before I move on, I did get to meet him at the stage door and I got to stage door for this lovely show, which I'm so grateful for, because obviously I'm not going to go into a rant about stage dooring, but I will say that it's not something as an audience member that you're entitled to, but it's always so wonderful when cast members do come out on stage door, and a lot of the cast did come out on stage door, which was so wonderful considering how cold it was when we saw the show. My hands were like freezing by the time I got back into the car and it almost started snowing, I believe, like tiny flurries, nothing too aggressive. But I was really hoping Merrick would come out to the stage door because I was so moved by his performance, and he did. When it was my turn to talk to him, I said hello to him, I told him how wonderful his performance was, and I also mentioned that I've been listening to his music. So if you do not know, Merrick is a singer slash songwriter. I believe he also plays guitar as well, so he's a musician as well. So at the time of me seeing the show, Merrick had an LP out called Entropy, and he had a few singles that he had dropped, and then he had another LP called Bad Bad Man that was dropping on Monday. And so I told him that I was listening to his music and that I really liked it, and he said, oh, you've been listening to it, you like it, like sort of just getting like a confirmation for me. And I was like, yeah, it's really wonderful. Your songs are really well written and they're very unique, very different than anything I've ever heard before. And he's like, oh, well, I have this thing in my backpack, let me get it. And he pulls out his CD, which, like I said, was not coming out until the Monday after I saw the show, and signs it to me. And in this moment, I'm freaking out and I'm like, what is going on? What is my life? What is happening? This CD is so beautiful. I love the cover art and even the back that has like the list of all of the tracks. And then he signed it to me, and we have this gorgeous inside cover art as well. And then we have the CD itself, which is beautiful. I don't want to scratch it, give me a second. That says Bad Bad Man on it, and I love the blue and grayish colors. Like, it's so pretty, and I'm just so grateful that I have this, because I came home and it was like 1 in the morning. I wanted to stay up and listen to it, but on Saturday I got up, I put the CD in, and I started listening to the songs, and they were wonderful, and I haven't stopped listening to them since. So please go and listen to Merrick's music. I will leave his Spotify link down below so you can go and check out all of his music. His songs are so good and so fun, and like I said, so different than anything I've ever heard before, and I love listening to artists that create their own music that comes from inside them, because you can really tell that it's authentic and genuine and real. Go check out Merrick Smith and his music, and if you get the opportunity to see him as Connor in Dear Evan Hansen, please do, because this man is so incredibly talented and wonderful, and I'm so grateful I got to meet him in the stage door and see him portray Connor. So the last actor that I want to talk about before I get into some staging stuff is Phoebe, who plays Alana. So Phoebe is my age. I think she may be a few months older than I am, which is crazy that that she's out there touring with this really immensely popular 6-time Tony Award winning show and just killing it. I'm going to be honest, the first time around seeing this show, I really wasn't that big of a fan of Alana. I just didn't have a connection to her. For that reason, I just sort of was like, on her character. Second time around, I love Alana so much more. I feel her so much more. I get her as a character so much more, and I have this connection with her that I did not have before. And I don't know necessarily why that is. Maybe it's just because I'm seeing an actress that is as old as I am, who is playing the character who's a teenager, and so I see that because it's a teenager playing that role who is a teenager and is going through teenager things and is portraying a character that's going through teenager things. I just felt like that connection for me really hit. I also feel like in the year and a half since I've seen this show, I've gone through a lot that has definitely changed my perspective on some things that allowed me to see and identify with Alana in ways that I didn't before. But her performance was wonderful, and she has such a beautiful voice, and I felt like I had this connection to Alana that I didn't have before, and I'm really grateful for that because I have this connection to Alana and I understand her in a way that I didn't before. So now to talk about some staging and blocking things and sort of going through each song. I love during Anybody Have a Map, we get to see a parallel between Evan and Connor. This is something that I definitely remember from seeing the original Broadway cast perform, but it's something that I still wanted to point out because I thought it was really beautiful nonetheless. You sort of get to see Evan and Connor next to each other as Heidi and Cynthia are singing, and to me it was this moment where I was like, whoa, because there's that big reveal that you get in the second act, which is that when Evan fell from the tree, he didn't fall, he let go. So he tried to commit suicide and he just failed at it. And Connor obviously succeeded, and so that's really the only difference between these two characters. Despite Connor being very full of rage and appearing to be very angry and pissed off and mean, he's actually just as broken and alone as Evan is, and so when he commits suicide, he succeeds. And Evan is the same thing as him. Like, he feels that same depressed and alone, and you don't really get to see that because Connor dies so quickly into the show, and you don't really find out about what it is that happened to Evan in that full story until the second act. Really, it's not until the entire show ends that you put those pieces together, and then you look back on that moment and you see the two of them next to each other, and you almost have this realization of they're not so different despite the fact that they appear so different. And I love that because for me, it gives me something to think about as I walk out of the theater, and it just gets your gears rolling, and it's insane. And there's so many little things that I didn't notice about the staging before that I got to notice now seeing the show for a second time, and it just made me so grateful because I feel like the more and more that I see this show, the more tiny little nuances I'll catch, and it's really, really exciting to get to have the opportunity to get to notice those things and to be able to catch the symbolism of them and to be able to see the importance behind them, because it just makes an enjoyable theater experience, and you feel so much more attached to the show when you get to notice those little nuances. So I loved that staging. There was also this really great thing that I didn't notice during Waving Through a Window and You'll Be Found, which is during Waving Through a Window, you have all the characters in a circle facing outward while Evan is in the middle. So none of those characters see him at all, and he's just kind of there, and he's alone, and he wants somebody to see him. He wants to feel like his voice is heard, like he matters, and nobody sees him at all, and it's really heartbreaking. Then you get to You'll Be Found, which is the number that closes Act 1. Now all the characters are suddenly facing him and see him because he's getting all this attention. His speech is going viral. It was this moment for me where I was like, oh my god, this staging is brilliant, because you see the major shift from the beginning of Act 1 to the end of Act 1 and just how much has changed with Evan in just that one act alone. How he was alone and now he has people who see him because of the Connor Project, because of him giving this speech. And it just, like, again, these tiny little things just hit me, and it made me so overwhelmed and emotional and just so full of feelings. And then you have the You'll Be Found reprise, which is another really great number, but it's also really sad and heartbreaking in a way, in that you see a lot of very negative feedback from social media. Connor's suicide note gets posted online, it ends up going viral, and then all these people who don't even know the Murphys at all start saying these horrible things about them. And so it's meant to mimic You'll Be Found, but it's so intense and overwhelming and overpowering, and it was so loud. Like, I almost wanted to cover my ears because I was like, oh my god, so much sound. But it's beautiful in that it's incredibly symbolic and reflects social media and how overwhelming it can be, and how there's people that are constantly posting things and constantly saying things, and it just follows you everywhere you go, and it can be overwhelming and overpowering, and it can be one of those things where you just want to shut it out and you can't because it's everywhere and it follows you. And I love that. Again, it's so brilliant, the show, how it takes a lot of current modern day issues that we're dealing with and mimics them so beautifully on the stage. I just love it, and it just makes me see the power of this show in a way that I feel like I've never gotten to see it before because now I'm noticing these little details that I didn't notice before. And while You Will Be Found is overwhelming in a sense that all the characters are taking in all these social media posts, it's much more uplifting and sort of shows you the good of social media and how it allows people to be seen and heard and identified, and it allows for an outlet of connection in a very odd and bizarre way. Then you sort of get to see the antithesis to that in the You Will Be Found reprise, where social media can be overwhelming and it's people just screaming at each other and hating on people that they don't even know without really understanding the story or knowing the facts, and it's just them being mean to be mean because they have the power in their hand to say anything. And I love that juxtaposition because it just shows you the complexity of social media and the internet. So now specific scenes or moments that I want to talk about. So we have Evan and Heidi, and I loved all of their moments together. Ben Levi Ross and Jessica Phillips were wonderful. Their dynamic was just so great and felt so genuine, and they had so many like awkward moments, but they had lots of beautiful moments. Like So Big So Small broke me and just hit me so hard. There's that moment after the what could have been dinner between Cynthia and Heidi and Larry when the Murphys offer Evan Connor's college fund, and Heidi just walks out and was like, none of this, I don't even know you people. And then Evan and Heidi have that huge fight, and Evan's like, I'm the worst thing that ever happened to you, and then Heidi is like, you're the only good thing that's ever happened to me. That line, those moments hit me. That's when I just lose it and I just break, and it was just so emotional. Even though I knew it was coming, it just hit me, and I'm still full of feelings just thinking about it. It was just so beautifully done. I love their dynamic. It felt so real and genuine, and such a great way of depicting a relationship, not just even a mother-son relationship, but any relationship between a parent and child in the 21st century, where kids are constantly hiding things from their parents because they don't feel comfortable talking to them because they're dealing with things they don't think their parents understand. That entire arc just between those two characters was so beautiful, and I loved every single moment of it. And then the last thing I want to talk about is a number that I really love that I feel like has only grown on me as time has passed, and that is To Break in a Club. So this number is incredibly inspirational, and it is a number that got me through second semester of sophomore year of high school. I just constantly would like leave my honors chem class and be like, To Break in a Club takes a little patience, takes a little time, a little perseverance, and a little uphill climb. You might not think it's worth it, you may begin to doubt, but you can't take any shortcuts. You've got to stick it out because it's a hard way, but it's the right way to break in a glove. All of it is so good. Like, God bless Pasek and Paul for creating that just anthem. It's so powerful to me because a lot of my high school experience is having to deal with struggles and obstacles and having to overcome them and being able to prove to myself that I can take on any obstacle that comes in my way. And I love that song so much because it got me through a lot of really hard moments, realizing that you're gonna have to power through, and it's gonna be difficult and it's gonna be hard, but you're gonna be able to prove that you can do it. And then when you make it and when you're successful in the end, you can look back and see all of the hard work that you've put in. And that's what AP Physics was for me, even though I didn't know it was coming when I saw the show for the first time, but then getting to see the show a second time a year and a half later, knowing everything that I went through in AP Physics, it just hit so much more because it was like, yeah, it's a hard way, but it is the right way and you can get through. And so that was really inspirational to me. And I got to talk to Aaron at the stage door, who plays Larry Murphy, and he was just so kind and sweet and wonderful, and I talked to him very briefly, and he's just such a wonderful Larry Murphy, and I love To Break in a Glove so much, so I mentioned that to him and how wonderful his performance was, and he was so sweet. All the cast members of the stage door were wonderful, and it was just such a phenomenal experience, and I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to experience. So I think that's about it for my review of the wonderful First National Touring Company of Dear Evan Hansen. I love this cast so much. Please go and see them on tour. I will be leaving a link down below where you can see all of the tour dates and where they're going to be. The touring company is coming back to Chicago next summer, so summer 2020, and I'm really excited because at that point I am going to be going into my sophomore year of college. I'm tempted to try to enter the lottery or try to get standing room because I'm not going to buy another ticket because I want people to have the opportunity to get to see the show. But if I can win the lottery or get standing room, that would be really cool. So it's definitely something I'm going to be trying for because I love this show. And if I can see it time and time again, I would love that. But I also do want to give other people the opportunity to see the show. So if you haven't seen Dear Evan Hansen yet and it's coming to a city near you, go and get tickets. Go and check it out because it's a wonderful show that I've so been moved by. This cast is phenomenal and I'm so grateful that I had the opportunity to see them perform. If you have gotten to see the touring company, comment your thoughts down below in the comment section. Did you have a performer that you thought was really sensational? A moment that really hit you? Something in the blocking or the staging that you really liked that you thought was interesting? Let me know. With that being said, thank you all so much for watching. If you want to follow me on Instagram and Twitter, I am at Gabby YA Books with one Y. That is GABBYA BOOKS. You can subscribe to me down below if you want updates for when I'm going to be posting new videos. You can click the little bell button. You can also check out all of my social media links, which are in the description if you want to follow me on Goodreads and find out what I'm reading. I have a Facebook page that I'm working on putting together for my YouTube channel. You can check that out if you want to see what books I've been reading and reviewing. You can check out my Teen Reads contributor page, which will be linked down below. So check out the description. It has a whole bunch of good goodies for you to check out. But I think that's about it for this video. So thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in a new one. Bye! I'm trying to find